Hello and welcome to another episode of AAC Access All Areas. I'm Ruth Jones.
And I'm Ali Batty. And today's question is, where can I get an AAC device from? So, Ruth, we have talked a little bit in previous episodes, haven't we, about going for a big assessment at a regional AAC specialised service, they're called. But that is not the only route. And one of our motivations for this podcast, or Ruth's motivation that she very kindly shared with me, and I thought, yes, there's definitely a need for this, is families who are not able to access AAC services for whatever reason, because it is still a postcode lottery, or it's very difficult to get referred to those specialised services, or there's 90% of potential AAC users just aren't eligible for specialised services because they don't have really complex access needs. So I think probably our audience for this podcast is more around a potential autistic AAC user, and generally speaking, those children and young people and adults don't have complex access needs, so they can access a standard tablet or a keyboard on a computer. And so therefore they won't be eligible for the specialised services. So what do they do? How do they get their hands on an AAC device?
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? Because like you say, like getting into the hubs is not an easy thing. But
Mm,
also I think even if you're, for example, if you're a parent of a child who's in like a specialist school, the schools don't just have loads of apps
mm,
and AAC devices
mm.
on tap. So come in the door, we think you'd benefit, here's an iPad. So many families end up having to source this either with an SLT that they're working with or by themselves, don't they? And
Yes.
so you've got the very sort of obvious route, which is you buy the device and you pay for the app.
Mm,
And that's kind of, there is clearly you can go to any electrical, um, provider, can't you, to get a device. And I think the main thing I would say with that is that we make sure that you check the app you want to get and what
yeah.
the operating system. So on Apple it's iOS. I
Mm.
don't even know what it is on Android, but um it kind of
What was
tells you,
it,
doesn't it,
Google
like
Play?
which iOS you need.
Yeah, we're showing our iPad bias here, aren't we? But that is a
Yeah.
question that I get asked a lot, like, which app do you recommend for Android? We might even have talked about that in the last episode, actually. And the
Mm,
problem with Android apps is just they're not as consistent in their performance because they're potentially being played on many different devices which have different specs. Um, they might perform slightly inconsistently across two different devices. And I would also say that Apple does have the monopoly on the app market, and
mm,
it's had the more established apps around for a long time. So they've gone through that painful adolescence of they've sort of ironed out most of the flaws, and they're on their 20th version. And so
mm.
the iPad apps that we have recommended in previous episodes are all really good and easy to use, and easy to edit. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode about which app and you're thinking, which app? Tell us now. Um, I'll just say go to the last episode because we do talk about that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the things that iPad stands out for as well is the fact that the AAC apps that are on there are AAC apps that have come from companies that made way back when
Mm,
dedicated devices. So there is years and years and years of development,
mm,
and they've
mm,
kind of just taken the product that they have on a dedicated device and turned it into an app. So I think like that also helps with it, doesn't it? So you
mm.
could obviously go and you can buy your iPad, and that, insurance is very important because we know that these devices need to be not only robust in language but also robust in their day to day. tolerance of life, don't they, with good cases and
Yes.
that sort of thing. But
Yeah, that's a good point. So I always recommend to families when they're buying their own or they're converting an iPad that they already have as a family, just make sure that it has a screen protector. So the sort of
mhm,
tempered glass film that you can very, very carefully drop onto your iPad and it affixes. And then if you're like me, you've got a slightly wonky one that doesn't quite fit over the home button and annoys you forever. But if you've got a person with a steady hand in your life, get them to do it. Actually, it's better now
mm,
because the newer iPads don't have a home button, so you don't have that like obvious flaw
yeah,
staring at you every time you use it. But yeah, tempered glass screen protector will save it from your everyday bashers and
yeah,
stop the sort of more serious damage to the actual iPad screen. So mine, I'm just looking at mine. Mine does have a little crack in the corner, and it's not going anywhere, so that's fine. If it got worse and it
mm,
looked like it could like catch your finger on it, then you change the tempered glass screensaver.
yeah,
And then a rubberized case is really useful for children.
yeah,
Um, so mine's got a nice carry handle. It's got a stand. I would say that's really important. So it's just got like some flaps on the back that you can stand it up,
yeah,
either so it's like almost upright or it's almost flat. You can do it either way. And the reason that's good is if you've got an iPad just flat on the table or flat on the floor, there's a lot of reflection from the overhead lighting.
mm,
Whereas if you've got an angle on it from the stand, you won't get all of that reflection. You'll actually be able to see the screen.
yeah, yeah,
Other accessories might be a strap. So some people like to have a carry strap as well. I know the OTs out there will be screaming at me saying, "Make sure you say don't wear it around your neck. Have it over a shoulder as
yeah,
well." And just be
yeah,
careful of swinging it around because, like, I have worked with children who, have broken, an iPad, like, because they're in a wheelchair and they've just swung out of their wheelchair and the iPad
mm,
screen has just bashed the arm of their wheelchair. So just do think about the movements that that child is making and the potential risks of having a strap.
yeah,
So yeah, that's the
definitely. Because if
basic thing
also
around having the iPad
yeah.
in a rubber's case. Yeah.
Yeah, since you've made that investment, and particularly as a family, you kind of, you'll be paying the money to get that device. You want to look after it, but equally because it's an AAC tool, in theory, that is with that child on all
Yeah.
day, every day in
Yeah.
their waking hours. So it does need to be some, most devices when we think about that, like even your phone is in your pocket a lot of the time, isn't it? Or it's
Yeah,
in a bag
yeah.
somewhere. Whereas like an AAC device, like you want it very accessible. So looking after it. And I think one thing we were just talking about was the kind of buying the iPads and where to get them from is that for a lot of the apps, if you check their website, it will tell you which iOS
Yeah.
you need, and then you could look at refurbished iPads, which then just
Mm.
makes it a little bit more affordable. So if you are a
Yes.
family or an individual thinking, I could do with some AAC support, often we talked about the apps in April and October for AAC and Autism Acceptance Awareness Months. They're often discounted, but equally you can get that device a little bit cheaper if you go for a slightly older model or a refurbished model. Just make sure if there's an app you want to use that you check that the device you're looking to buy has got the
Mm.
right software to run the app on.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
don't think they have to be too like it doesn't have to be too old
Yeah, the
to get
last
to the
time I
iOS, like they
checked,
put it
it's
off quite
iOS
late.
15 or above. So,
Yeah.
so I probably checked 6 months ago, and Grid and ProLoquo and TD Snap were all saying as long as it's iOS 15 or above. And I think we are currently on iOS 20 or 21. So, you can
Mhm.
have an older device and it will still work. I'm just thinking, what's my iPad? I think my iPad's a 10th generation iPad. Um,
Yeah.
so just actually, that's an excellent question for ChatGPT to go on there and say,
Yeah.
can you list all of the models of iPad that run iOS 15 or later?
Yeah. Yes,
And then you would
good
get your list
idea.
of models and then go on to, a secondhand website, and
Yeah.
make sure that you're purchasing one of those. And also just, really double check what size iPad you're getting before you buy your case, because it's really easy
Yeah.
to buy the wrong size of case or the wrong size of screen protector as well.
Yeah. There's so many generations out there now, aren't there? So actually making
Yeah.
sure you know which one you've got to get the right accessories and stuff. And I
Mm.
think it just popped into my head as well, with different iPads you get different memories, but generally you can
Mm.
buy the lower memory because
Mm.
if you're only using it as an AAC device, you might
Mm.
just be storing any photographs on it and the AAC app, and there's not lots of other stuff that goes. So I've
Mm.
generally found that you can get the refurbished, cheaper model on a slightly smaller memory, and that will run the AAC apps as you need them to. But there are other ways, aren't there, as well? There are charities out there, there are
Yes,
grants, there's
yes.
various different things.
Yeah, so a big one is the family fund. So that specifically is for families raising a disabled or seriously ill child on a low income. So they will give you they allow you to apply for a grant, and that would cover the whole cost. Um, there's also a trust called the Sequel Trust, and that's spelt
Mhm.
Sequal. I don't know whether that is means tested or not, to be fair. Um, there is also an organisation which was started by Dan Harris, who is a dad of an
Mhm.
AAC using child, and he's also a neurodivergent sort of business leader. So he had the brilliant idea to liaise with businesses and try and get businesses to donate their secondhand iPads. Because if you think about like banks or probably any business now uses iPads in some capacity. It could be restaurants. Like I've been in restaurants or
Yeah,
cafes
yeah.
where you've ordered from an iPad, but most businesses would have used iPads that they no longer want to use, and rather than throwing it away and it going in landfill, um, then Dan Harris's idea was let's get them to donate them to us. So that organisation can be found at freetalker.org. Um, I think the applications are closed at the moment because they were overwhelmed with numbers of applications. So keep an eye on that. But that just gives you an idea that that is also a potential route. So if you know someone who works for a big organisation or a local organisation, maybe they are updating their iPads, and you might be able to
Mm.
approach them that way. I've also supervised a very resourceful speech and language therapist who put a call out on her local Facebook group to say,
Yeah.
I'm working with a family whose child needs an iPad for their communication. Does anyone have one that they don't need anymore? And she got like 3 iPads left on her doorstep
Mhm.
that week, which is like heartwarming, isn't it? That people are so generous.
Yeah.
Um, Something
I
else
think
that I
there are lots of
found.
different routes.
Yes, yeah. I was gonna
It's
say,
knowing where
Ruth,
they are, aren't they, really?
yes, yeah. Um, so another thing that I found from my question to ChatGPT about where can we get affordable iPads, I'd never heard of this before, but there's a digital inclusion scheme called the Good Things Foundation, and that works with community hubs like libraries to provide refurbished tablets. So if you Google Good Things Foundation, um, that might give you some information about local hubs or
Mm.
libraries that you can access. And then refurbished iPads as well. So my husband bought his last phone through, is it Back Market? I want to say Back Market.
Mhm.
And he said, "Right, I'm never
Yeah, I
buying a
think
new
you're
phone
right.
again," because it was considerably cheaper and came with a guarantee and a much cheaper way of getting
Mm.
an iPhone. So they also do iPads there. Is there anything else, Ruth? Any other routes into getting an iPad that you can think of?
Well, one thing. I was just thinking about is a little bit where I've had families contact me, talking about getting iPads and apps written into the education, health and care plan.
Mm.
And that's been quite an interesting one for me because
Mhm.
some local authorities and schools, it gets written in and they're like, okay, great, they find the funding, it gets delivered, and all is well with the world.
Mm.
However, for others, either that's been a barrier to placement because it's had something in and they've not been able to provide it, or
Mhm.
it's been a challenge because even though they want it in the EHCP or it is in the EHCP, there's been pushback over providing it. So
Mhm.
there is a space, isn't there, within that conversation at an annual review to think about, uh, you know, a device and the app, and could some funding be sought through that for
Mm.
a child,
Mm.
or
And in my
25, isn't it? You know,
experience, it's that obstacle is more about the management of the device and the who owns it, who owns the account, like the Apple account, and it throws up loads of complications. So if the local authority control the Apple account, then it means the parent can't download or update new apps, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare. Um, One would have thought that a solution could have been reached by now, but
yes.
not not
It shouldn't
everywhere.
be. It shouldn't be that complicated, should it? And I think there is that, though, isn't there? That actually something I suppose to be mindful of as a family, if you are thinking about AAC for your child, is thinking about longevity.
Mm,
And so if you are looking at funding routes, obviously if you buy it, it is yours and you
mm,
then have control over that
mm,
device. You set up, like you say, your Apple account, you set up the app account, you deal with
mm.
backups, you deal with breakages, you have your insurance, you kind of control everything. There is there are situations that I'm sure you've come across, I've definitely come across, where a school has provided a device and then when that child leaves that school, the device is actually schools.
Yes.
And so I think it's daft, like how
Mm,
but it is a resource issue and it's one of
mm,
those
mm,
ongoing issues of many of which there are within our special
mm,
educational needs and disability system. So let's not get started on that, otherwise we'll be here all day. But something to be mindful of as a parent is actually if you are getting your device through another one of those channels, is just checking out, is
mm,
it your device? Are you still
mm.
in control of it? Is it kind of gifted to you through that
Yeah, yeah,
particular stream? So that there are no issues with things like updates, or
yes,
if the device breaks, who is responsible for
yeah,
it, and all those
yes.
kinds of things, because you do need to kind of be aware, don't you? The reality is that these things, technology ages, and
Mm,
AAC apps definitely, as iPads get older, I've had a few AAC users and they've maybe been using their iPads for 3 or 4 years and it
mm,
just starts to get a bit glitchy, the app
mm,
slows down. So I think there's something about kind of how, if you're getting one now and it's working well for your child, also thinking a little bit about, do you need to maybe start putting a little bit away each month? Or
mm,
is there kind of,
mm,
now you've got something, let's think about where we get the next one from
mm.
as and when the time arises, isn't there? So there's kind of this
Yeah,
in the moment right here, but there's also that future provision for
mm,
for an AAC user if they're likely to be lifelong or at least for a long time in their life,
mm.
be using AAC.
Yeah,
And you can use
yeah.
multiple different of these avenues, can't you? You can use different
Mm,
avenues to get them at each point in time. I've
mm.
worked with I'd say most of the children that I work with at the moment are self-funded
Yes.
devices where parents have gone through. Here in Wiltshire, we have like it's called a local panel.
Mhm,
So there are panel devices. So children can be referred in. I
mm,
think the panel, I don't know where the funding comes from for that panel, but there is like so it's kind of like it's not at the hub level that takes you right to the Southwest hub. It's kind of an in between, um, so devices can come from there, but I'm not
mm,
sure again how that works. Is it the panel's device or is it the child's? Kind of if it breaks, all those sorts of bits and pieces. I'm not
mm.
quite sure how that works, but um, there are also other local opportunities, which I'm guessing if they do it in Wiltshire, there must be other counties that have a similar
Yes, yes,
setup.
I'm sure, I'm sure. Um, and I also, like I can imagine a scenario where a family have been waiting and waiting and waiting for the local authority to purchase a device or to decide who's going to purchase it, and then it gets agreed. And there would be nothing more frustrating than you get that device and then you don't have the level of sort of control or autonomy than that you thought you would over it. How frustrating that would be. So sometimes I think the simplest choice is to sort of try and self-fund it. But
Yeah,
I appreciate that might not be possible for every family. So it's good that there are
yeah.
other ways of obtaining that.
I think some families I work with have used their disability living allowance, like a
Hmm.
portion of that, either for independent therapy support or to kind of get a device and maybe have some independent therapy support just to get their child up and running with it.
Yes.
Um, the reality is that I think you and I share that same set of values and beliefs that that shouldn't be the case, but equally that there are, that might be a way in for some families if
Mm.
you're in receipt of disability living allowance,
Yeah.
for a child with communication needs that, you know, but I think there's so many other things as well, aren't there, that disabled children need in their lives. So it's kind of, it is just a situation that different families have different financial circumstances, and that
Yeah.
it shouldn't be the case, but it is the case that for some that is a barrier. So actually knowing about the
Mhm.
charities and the grants and things is really important, isn't it? To think that
Yes.
there are other
Yeah.
ways to be able to get access to this sort of tech. And then hopefully things like our podcast and people who share information, you can then get set up and give it a bit of a go
Mm.
yourself. Because
Yes.
that's the other thing, isn't it? Once you've got it, it's then getting going with it.
Yes.
We'll have
Yes.
to do an
Yeah.
episode
So
on
should we
that, I
talk a
think.
little bit about the initial setup?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's probably helpful, um, just to think a little bit about what do you need? I guess maybe I'm thinking, do we talk about today that practical setup? So we've talked a bit about cases,
Mm.
but I'm thinking sort of maybe more the practical thing before we even get to putting the app on the iPad, like setting up your Apple ID, making sure that you have got insurance in place or
Mm.
some kind of cover for any damages. And one thing I have worked with quite a few families and schools with is creating like a homeschool contract over it. So if you're thinking about introducing AAC and your child is going to another setting, how are you navigating that? So whose responsibility is it to charge the device? Whose responsibility is it to back up the vocabulary? Is it just going to be home's responsibility to edit? Do the team at school need some training? There's quite a
Mm.
lot, even before you get to adding the app and working with the child on the app to think about. Is there anything
Mm.
else you can think of that you would be kind of thinking
I
about
would
that
I would
setup?
say a common question that I get asked is, should it be an iPad just for the communication,
Hmm.
or should it also have games and access to YouTube and things like that? And I would say there's not a right answer to that. I think it's a case by case basis. So it would depend on that child's sort of like overall use of an iPad, how familiar are they with an iPad already? Um, and things like, schools don't like children coming in and taking photos of other children. So you might need to have it locked into a communication app whilst the child is in school. You might want to probably do want to turn off the Wi-Fi. On the device when they're in school as well, and also to because some children are so good at going on the App Store or elsewhere and making purchases. So just trying to think through how do you make it kind of childproof is a horrible word, isn't it? But
Mm.
children are so
Financially safe.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I think also there is that thing, isn't there? Like you say, it's a bit of a case by case basis. For some
Hmm.
families, they don't have access to that financial privilege to be able to have multiple devices. So the home device does have the communication app on, and therefore it's multifunctional. For some of our children, young people, particularly if you're a more at that Gestalt language processing end of the language continuum, you kind of deal in chunks and
Mm.
media, having access to things like YouTube clips can be really helpful for
Yeah.
communication. I also work with a young person who loves to take pictures. so that they can show school from home and home from school
Yeah.
things they've been doing during the day.
Yes.
And while you can program that, they're a grid user, while you can program that into the news section of their grid, actually they don't have the programming skills, but they do
Mm,
have capacity to be able to take pictures and then they
mm,
can show people at home. So we've kind of had to work out, and we're still working out, to be honest, the safe way for that to happen in
yeah.
terms of like taking photos of, particularly like you say, if you're in a school. So I think there are sort of some very practical things, aren't there, to thinking
Mm,
about where you've got your iPad from, and then what are those kind of safeguards
yeah. Yeah.
for it.
But there are some,
And
some brilliant pioneer parents who have negotiated this with the school. So I'm thinking of one family who negotiated with the school that their child would have like 4 Disney movies downloaded on the device because she was pulling Gestalt phrases from those Disney
yeah,
movies, and that was a really important part of her communication. And good on the school,
mm,
they agreed to that because it wasn't sort of
yeah,
going online using YouTube. It was predefined Disney movies. So there
yeah,
are ways around that, and where parents have been, really brave and innovative and just opened up that conversation with the school, and the school have been open-minded as well, because it is really easy for a school to get scared and think, oh no, well, our local authority won't allow us to do this under safeguarding. But that does need a bit more thought because this is access to communication. So um,
yeah,
it's weighing up sort of like the risks and the benefits, and as we know, like equitable access doesn't look the same
yeah,
for all students. So sometimes the concern is, oh, if this child is allowed an iPad, all of the children will want an iPad, or they'll all want to use this child's iPad. And my response to that would be, not all of the children in this class need an iPad for their communication. The rest of the children
mm,
are accessing their speech. So there just needs to be a very clear message from all of the adults, which the other children will pick up on very quickly as well, is that
mm,
this child needs it for their communication. And yeah, not sort of like applying the same rules to everybody, really thinking in a more nuanced way for equitable access to communication and learning.
yeah, I think so. And I think there is something, isn't there, about one normalizing different
Yeah.
types of communication within a classroom. And I think sometimes people feel a bit unsure about how to navigate that, but
Mm.
actually we need to improve acceptance of other forms of communication. And when
Yes,
children are
yes.
young is a perfect time to do that. So actually a school is in a really powerful place to be
Mm,
able to support an AAC user and their peers to understand that. And I
mm.
also think sometimes peers getting involved in the device is incredible because it's
Totally.
that sort of like shared communication.
Yes.
And as long as it's not that I'm a kid and I'm excited and I'm taking over, but actually just
Mm,
noticing and interacting and
mm,
listening, and you can have some really, really lovely. I'm thinking back actually to a preschool I worked in that was a mainstream preschool, and I was working with a non-speaking autistic child attending there, and we were introducing an iPad, and the others would come over, but they just would carefully watch. And we talked a lot
mm,
about, like, I talked to them about being autistic, being
mm,
non-speaking, so having other ways. Like, we'd look at it, and if the child I was working with was doing something else, they would have a little explore while I was doing some therapy over here with the
mm,
child I was working with. They'd have a little explore on grid, and
mm,
what that meant was then when he would use it sometimes, they'd be like, "Oh, you're talking about," and so they were responding to it because they understood it. And I think
mm,
that was such a beautiful space because it was honoring his communication as it
mm,
showed up. And ultimately, our underlying neurodiversity affirming principles are honor all forms of communication. And I think that's where schools do need to be brave in
mm,
taking that and really delivering that in an
mm,
inclusive, equitable way, that we are
mm,
honouring all forms of communication. So if that is gestalts and clips of movies and that child needs access to that, we honour that as their communication. We see that we're on a pathway with their communication development, but right now where they are at, we have to play to their strengths. And if their strengths lie in media clips for communication, then they need access to that, don't
Mm,
they? And so I
mm,
think there's that side of AAC, and it can be a barrier, but I think there is a a conversation, isn't there? And that
mm,
hoping and that opening schools up and other settings to
mm.
being flexible and
Yeah.
understanding that, access to communication is a basic need and a basic
Mm.
right. And by not allowing that, you're kind of taking that away from a child, which is
Yes.
not
I
okay.
always use the analogy of, taking away a child's AAC is like sellotaping a child's mouth up. Like, we don't do that with
Mm,
speaking children, so why would we do that with
yeah.
non-speaking children? So,
Yeah.
Ruth, I
I
guess we're
definitely
coming to
thought,
the end
oh,
of this episode now. Should we do one of our
yeah.
little glimmers to finish with?
Yeah, you know what? I've been thinking about this week because I had a moment and I thought, oh, I'm going to be able to see Ali and share it. And I would share this as like quite a clinically vulnerable moment in that I have been working with a young person for a long time, and their specialist hearing impairment teacher asked if they could come along to the session. And the session is very child led. To anybody on the outside, it looks like we spend half an hour in a sensory room playing iPad games,
Mm,
which we do. But
mm,
there is a lot of work going on underneath that. And the hearing impairment advisory teacher came along, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like such imposter syndrome. Like, do I know what I'm doing? Like, do I know what the goals are? Like, are we doing well enough at this? Like, how? And afterwards, the teacher said that it was basically that they just learned so much about how
mm,
AAC should be modeled in a
mm,
meaningful way,
mm.
supporting a child around their goals and their language development in a way that is enjoyable. And she just said it was really like lovely experience for her to see how AAC should be used. And
Uh-huh.
I just thought, oh,
Mm.
phew, like that relaxation.
Yes.
Okay, actually, because I think for a lot of people, you probably go in and you see communication tools in classes where people are trying to engage kids in talking about the lesson that they're maybe not
Mhm.
interested in. And so it's not so meaningful. And so for me, it was probably a little bit of a validation that
Mm,
I'm getting it
mm,
right, but that,
mm.
yeah, that kind of we can experience so much joy
Yes,
through meaningful
yes.
AAC
Yeah,
use.
yeah.
And so yeah, it was a lovely session. We had a really great time playing. There's a game we quite like, a Tokaboka one, where you do some cooking and then you can feed it and the monster's
Mm,
face like reacts. And we're practicing
mm,
language for rating and language for opinions. So we were able to say whether we think the monster thought it was 5 rubbish or 1 amazing or
mhm,
somewhere in the middle. And so yeah, it was just a really lovely session, but really lovely
mm.
to have that validated by somebody external as well.
Yes,
Have you
yes.
got one?
I do have one. It's kind of similar. So mine is a bit of a shout out to teaching assistants, to TAs.
Yeah.
So I was supporting a child the other day, and it was a new agency TA who I haven't worked with before, but she is going. I think I understand that she's spending a significant period in this school supporting the child that I'm supporting. So she asked if she could come in on our session. I was like, yes, of course you can. Because it's usually
Yeah.
me asking, can a TA come and join us? So she just gave off this vibe from the start of she was really keen to see how it worked. So she sat in the sensory room, and the child was really dysregulated and upset when they started. And then through the session, she said, I saw the difference that this made. Like, I saw him relax, and he really loves looking through books, and she said, I haven't seen him engaged for so long, and I saw him every time you were modelling something, he was looking at the iPad, so his eyes were going from the book to the iPad, and he was really taking it in. And I said to her at the end, you need to train to be a speech and language therapist, because everything that she was saying was just like spot on, like she'd just noticed everything. So I've really sort of like hopefully planted a seed there for her, because she did start thinking about what I need to do next, and looking at all of my options, but she clearly was very interested in this. And then today I kind of had to say a bit of a goodbye to a TA who I've worked with for 2.5 years, I would say. She's moving on to another role.
Oh
And
gosh.
just loads of appreciation from me. Like, her role has just been so crucial in a couple of the children that I've supported. She's really believed in their communication. She's really sort of carried on the things that I've done in sessions through the week. She's really noticed their literacy development or their multimodal communication, and has made such a difference to their lives. So I just think this week is like TA week. Thank you, TAs, for all of the amazing care that you take of the children that we support. And I, her warmth, this TA that is I said goodbye to today, her warmth and her care and her love for these children, really comes across, and that is that's gold in our world,
Mm.
isn't it?
Well, it is absolutely, because ultimately communication comes from connection, and if you've got
Mm,
love and warmth, your chances are you're going to build some lovely connections, aren't you, which is
mm,
where
mm,
the good stuff comes from in terms of
mm,
communication. And yeah, when you kind of get those, that you feel like, I feel like you meet people in work, in schools, teachers, TAs, support workers, and you just think like, oh, if we could clone you
mm. Oh,
and run you out across, like multiple classrooms, because there are just people who just really, like you say, they're just thinking like a therapist, and
yes.
that's a lovely place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I wish there was a fast track route that they could become a speech and language therapist without having to, like, study for 2 years and give up their income for 2 years. I know there is now an apprenticeship route, um,
Yes.
but, yeah, I do think that sort of, like, access to our profession is not great either, but that's a totally different podcast. That's not AAC Access All Areas, that's a different podcast.
It is, but one we probably feel equally as passionate about. Oh, well, thank you so much for everyone joining us for this episode. As always, if you've got any questions that you'd like us to answer or focus an episode around, then you can contact Ali or myself on Instagram, or emails, and or leave a note. I think you can comment actually on the show, can't you, on different platforms? And we'd
Oh, yeah,
love
leave us a
reviews
review
and
if
any
you feel like
feedback.
leaving us a
Yeah.
review.
Absolutely. I know. Well, I think that like gets it, we just want to get the message out. The whole point of this podcast is just about sharing our passion and our sort of learnings and our
Mhm,
journeys as we continue to learn from the Fab AAC users that we support. So actually, yeah, the more it gets out, the more people who can listen and kind of share their thoughts and reflections, then the better really for
mhm,
us, because that's the point, isn't it? Just kind of sharing the information that we have
mhm.
and kind of learning. Feels like a bit like peer supervision. I feel like I come along and I feel really like, oh yeah, I've got lots of things to think about. So it's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth.